The man on stage was explaining a system I had created without knowing I was watching from the hallway. I did not stop because I was curious. I stopped because I heard a sentence I had written, word for word. The data engine that adapts in real time to patient responses. That was mine. And Craig Renner, the new chief executive officer, was saying it like it had always been his. My name is Madeline Shore. I am 41 years old, and for the last 8 years, I led product strategy at Helix Bioworks. I built the foundation of the platform they are now selling for $1,250 million. I stayed through years of trial runs, failed funding calls, and overnight coding sprints in borrowed offices. And I never asked for much, just a seat at the table I helped build. But that morning, I realized I had been replaced by someone who did not even understand how the system worked. Inside the room, Craig was showing Ericsson's board how our platform could save time in treatment simulations. I could tell by the slide layout. It was the version I had edited 3 months ago. My notes, my diagrams. But my name was gone. A young woman stepped beside me, Emma. She used to be my intern. Now she worked as Craig's assistant. She paused when she saw me. "You are not in there?" I gave her a small smile. "Apparently not." She looked away, guilty. "I thought you were leading this." "I thought so too," I said quietly. At 11:12 in the morning, a calendar invite appeared on my screen. Meeting with Craig in Human Resources. Room 5C, 12:30 p.m. No subject, no explanation. Just the cold silence companies use when they want you gone without saying why. I walked in at exactly 12:30. Craig was already seated wearing his usual navy jacket, tie slightly loosened. Paige from Human Resources sat across from him, holding a file with my name on it. "Madeline," Craig began, "thank you for coming. I will keep this short. We are restructuring ahead of the merger. Your role is no longer part of the plan." Just like that. No thank you for 8 years, no discussion. Just a folded letter and a list of access shutdowns. Effective immediately. I did not speak. I did not argue, because I had expected this moment, not in detail but in shape. I had seen it happen to others, and 6 years ago I had quietly made a decision they had forgotten to check. Back when Helix was still sharing office space and asking friends for funding, I filed the patent for the core technology in my own name. I paid for it myself. I did not tell anyone. Not because I planned revenge, but because I had seen too many good systems taken by the wrong people. I wanted to protect what we were building. For years, I let the company use it freely. No contracts, no conditions. I believed in the mission. I believed in the people. But loyalty means nothing to those who think power makes them untouchable. As I stood to leave, Craig offered his hand. I looked at it, then I walked out without taking it. In the hallway, Emma caught up with me. "They are announcing the merger this afternoon," she said, voice low. "They are using your strategy deck. Your name is not on it." I nodded. They really do not know, do they? I looked her in the eye. "No," I said, "but they are about to." And if you have ever stood in a hallway like that, watching someone else take credit for what you built, then stay with me, because the moment they fired me was the moment the patent started counting. I walked home with the envelope still unopened in my bag. I did not rush. I did not call anyone. I let the city move past me in quiet streaks of noise, horns, crosswalks, voices that no longer had anything to do with me. For years, I had built something I believed in, and now it belonged to people who had forgotten where it came from. When I stepped into my apartment, I did not turn on the lights. I walked straight to the shelf in the hallway, pulled down a black binder, and laid it flat on the table. Inside, behind the dust and the silence, was everything they had missed. The original system draft, the integration maps, the handwritten clause I had sent to a friend at the patent office on a Sunday night, back when we still called our work a prototype. His note was still clipped to the back. Filed, Madeline Shore, individual IP rights, core logic infrastructure. At the time, I did not think I would need it. We were 5 people in a borrowed lab space, splitting rent and skipping meals for demo nights. The patent was a way to make sure we could keep going if something went wrong. No one asked to see it. No one tried to take it. I never even mentioned it to the others, because in those early years we trusted each other. Trust was how we survived. That changed when the board brought in Craig. He came in smiling, fast-talking, the kind of leader who said words like optics and leverage more than he asked about system stability or partner compliance. He fired 2 team leads in his first month, reorganized the data group without consulting the people who had built it, told me once, flatly, "You are too emotionally attached to legacy design." Legacy design. He meant the thing I spent 5 years refining, the thing that saved us during the compliance scare in 2019, the thing that held every update in place without breaking a single hospital deployment. Still, I stayed. I worked late. I restructured everything for scale. I made the system easier for people like Craig to sell, even if they did not understand what made it stable. And I never said a word about the patent, because I thought maybe they would respect the work if it kept holding up under pressure. Maybe the results would speak louder than ambition. But ambition is louder, especially when money gets involved. By the time I poured my first glass of wine that night, the merger announcement had gone live. Helix had signed a deal with Ericsson for $1.25 billion, pending full tech transfer and integration of Helix Core. I stared at the screen. They had named it Helix Core, a title I invented, now printed on a press release that did not even include my initials. I opened a new tab and logged into the USPTO archive, the patent database. Filing ID, #778045231. Registered owner, Madeline Shore. Core system infrastructure, adaptive response logic. Filed, 2017, still active, still mine. I clicked download and saved a fresh copy to a new folder. Then I picked up my phone and called someone I had not spoken to in months. "Dan," I said when he picked up, "I need a lawyer." He did not ask why. He had worked with me on 2 deals years ago and had always told me to call if things ever got strange. "What are we protecting?" he asked. "Not protecting," I said. "Clarifying, they just sold something I own." There was silence, then the slow sound of him sitting down. "Tell me everything." I closed the binder, folded the patent copy into a new envelope, and slid it next to the old one, the one Craig had handed me when they let me go. One was theirs, the other was mine, and only one had the power to stop everything they had planned. Dan met me the next morning in a quiet corner of a coffee shop downtown. No suits, no folders, just his notepad, his glasses, and the look he always wore when something didn't sit right. He read the patent line by line. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask for context, didn't even look up until he reached the signature page. Then he leaned back, pen resting against his thumb. "They're not just using this," he said. "They've already promised it." I nodded. He already knew what that meant. When a company sells something it doesn't legally own, every document signed on top of that false claim can crack, especially when it involves technology with public health implications. No investor likes uncertainty in the foundation. He closed the folder carefully. "You want to go public?" "No," I said, "not yet. I want clarity, not noise, and I want options." Dan smiled. "So we start with a notice." He drafted it on the spot, a calm, factual letter addressed to Helix's legal team and the board. No accusations, no threats, just a line that shifted the balance. "This is to inform you that the system infrastructure referred to in recent external communications as Helix Core is covered by active IP held exclusively by Miss Madeline Shore." Attached was a copy of the patent. That letter went out at noon. By 4 o'clock, I had 2 missed calls from Paige in HR and a short, vague email from Craig. "Madeline, got word about something you may have sent to legal. Would like to clarify the intent. Please let me know a time to connect." There was no "I hope you're well," no mention of the firing, just a new tone, careful, measured, nervous. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Emma. She picked up quickly, her voice tight. "They're in chaos, Maddie. I heard someone say IIP exposure in the hallway. Craig hasn't come out of his office all afternoon." "What are they saying about the patent?" I asked. "Nothing out loud, but they're pulling files. I saw someone open the old server logs from 2017. I think they're trying to see if it's real." I exhaled. "It is." "I know," she said. Then quieter, "You built it. Everyone who's been here long enough knows that." I paused. "Do they know I never charged them for it?" There was silence. "No," she said. "I don't think anyone ever knew." For years, I had let Helix use the system without a license fee. I didn't ask for royalties. I never brought it up during negotiations. I believed in what we were trying to build. I thought, if I made it work, they'd protect it. I didn't expect to be erased. That night, I went back through my old files. Every demo deck, every early team email. I even found a recording from the first time I presented the platform to investors. It was a rough video, bad lighting, shaky frame, but there I was, standing in front of a whiteboard, explaining the system's logic by hand. I was younger then, hopeful, a little too fast with my words, but the core idea was already there. I watched the video twice. Then I uploaded it to a secure folder along with the patent, the letter from Dan, and the last 3 strategy decks Craig had submitted under his name. And I added one note at the top. If this goes to court, here's what they'll have to explain. Not because I wanted a courtroom, but because I knew how these things worked. The moment they realized what I still owned, they would scramble to bury it or buy time, and I had no interest in either. I wasn't planning to speak. I was just making sure I was ready, because the next move wasn't mine. It would be theirs. And I needed to be standing still when the ground shifted under them. 3 days passed, not a word from Craig, not a word from anyone at Helix, but I didn't need a call to know the silence wasn't stillness. It was hesitation. And hesitation in a company like that always means someone's realizing they stepped onto the wrong ground. Then Dan forwarded an email, a short message from Helix's external legal team. This time, the wording was careful, measured. We are open to discussing a retroactive licensing agreement to ensure mutual alignment and avoid any disruption. That was it. No denial, no pretense. Just the first acknowledgement that what they called Helix Core might not be theirs to give away. I closed the laptop slowly and walked to the window. The city moved as usual, cars pushing through lights, people weaving past each other on sidewalks. But the air around me had changed. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. They were circling back, because they had no choice. I spent the rest of the day pulling together my files, not to prove anything but to remember what I built, how I built it, every early test, every change I made in the middle of the night because a hospital integration was running hot and no one else could find the flaw. Helix had been using my system for 6 years without a contract, and I let them. Because back then, I thought we were building something together. I believed that the work spoke for itself, that loyalty would be enough. But I had learned something in that silence. When people think they can erase your name from a system and still use the logic you wrote, they don't respect the work. They think it was a convenience, and now that convenience had a price. That evening, I received a voice message from someone I hadn't heard from in a long time. Quiet, direct, just one sentence. You were right not to burn the bridge, Maddie, but now you're the only one who knows where it actually begins. I didn't reply. Some things don't need to be said twice. It started small. A client's portal failed to load past the login screen, then another couldn't retrieve archived patient records. Within 2 hours, Helix's support team sent out a blanket statement calling it temporary server latency. But I knew the difference between slow and broken. This wasn't lag, this was misalignment. They had tried to reconfigure the system after I left, changing core fields, updating formats they didn't understand. Probably on Craig's order or someone under him desperate to prove they could still steer the ship. But what they didn't realize was simple. The structure wasn't modular. You couldn't just pull one wire and expect the engine to hum. By late afternoon, I had 5 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. One came from the IT head at a regional clinic I'd helped onboard years ago. Another, strangely, from a former investor. Dan called too. He didn't waste time. They've sent out a memo. Internal review is calling it a data mismatch issue, but you and I both know it's not that. The system's logic doesn't recognize the overrides. Because it wasn't built to be overridden, I said quietly, not without the base sync. Exactly. I didn't need to look at their dashboard. I could picture it. Dozens of blinking alerts, dependencies collapsing one by one, front-end access frozen because back-end logic was misfiring. But the deeper failure wasn't technical. It was institutional. For years, I had sent quiet reminders, documents, notes, comments in shared drives, laying out exactly why the system required one source of truth, not to be controlling, but to keep the thing from breaking under pressure. And now the pressure was here. Emma messaged me once that evening. Just 2 words. It's happening. I knew what she meant. Not just the technical fallout, but the moment where the illusion breaks, the moment people stop pretending someone else can fix it. Helix had removed me thinking the structure would stay intact, but they never realized they'd been walking through a house I built with no blueprint left behind. They assumed I was replaceable. And the system was showing them, quietly, ruthlessly, that I wasn't. By the end of the week, I didn't need anyone to call me to know what was happening. The silence had changed. It wasn't cold anymore, it was loud. Clients had started pulling back. Not publicly, not yet, but I saw the signs. A revised inquiry about contract terms, a sudden request to pause implementation. One client, a hospital I had personally helped bring on board 5 years ago, removed Helix from their integration list entirely. They didn't say why. They didn't need to. Once a system stops behaving predictably, trust evaporates quietly. And Helix was unraveling, not because of sabotage, not because of any external attack, but because no one inside knew where the core had even begun. They had changed structures they didn't understand, renamed fields I had set with specific rules, and now, every time a client tried to retrieve something, the logic folded in on itself. Mismatches, dropouts, total silence. The worst part was this. They still didn't know what they had lost. They were looking for errors in syntax, bugs in the interface. But the problem wasn't in the code, it was in the understanding, and that they couldn't repair. I had offered to document everything a long time ago, back when I thought I would be here forever, back when I believed that if I left even a trace of the logic, someone would carry it forward with care. But the requests were always postponed, the meetings pushed, the priorities rearranged. Then Craig told me, "It's your system. Why would we need a backup plan?" That sentence echoed in my mind now. They thought they were saving time, but what they did was build a $1.25 billion merger on a foundation no one could explain. And now, as the foundation shifted, no one could fix it without first admitting who had built it. Dan checked in briefly that Friday. His voice was quiet. "They'll come with a number soon," he said. "They've realized it's either license your work or watch the platform lose its clients." I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the wall in front of me, the framed print still leaning where I had never bothered to hang it. It was a blueprint, one I had drawn during the first year of Helix. Messy, unpolished, full of arrows and question marks, but it had been right, more right than anyone had known. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. "If they want to use it now, they'll pay for it. Properly, with terms, with a deadline." Dan paused, then answered simply, "They'll have no choice." The call didn't come from Craig. It came from someone I had never met, an outside counsel, polite to the point of sterility. His voice carried that distant tone like he'd read a briefing before dialing but hadn't truly understood the stakes. They wanted to open discussions on a potential licensing path forward. I let him speak. No urgency in my voice, no bitterness either, just silence. Because that silence now carried weight. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. They were chasing clarity, and it was buried under a system they no longer understood. After the call, I sat at my desk, not to draft a response, not to call Dan, but to remember. I opened a folder I hadn't touched in over a year. Not the legal archive, the old one, the one I kept during the first build, when Helix wasn't even called Helix yet. The folder where I'd sketched out user flows on napkins, annotated back-end diagrams with coffee-stained Post-its, and filmed my early tests late at night just to prove to myself the logic worked. That system, they had taken it, repackaged it, rebranded it, filed for their own patent under a cleaned-up name. They thought I'd left it unguarded, but they never knew what was already filed, what date was already stamped, what name already sat in the ledger. Mine. And now the registrar had replied. A conflict had been flagged, an original claim predating theirs by 4 years, filed from a co-working space in Seattle, when all I had was an old laptop and $200 in my business account. They didn't know how much I had protected it, because back then, I didn't think I was building something for myself. I thought I was building something for all of us, for Helix, for the hospitals, for the patients, for the clients who trusted the system because they trusted me. That was why I never pushed for ownership in loud ways. I had quietly filed my protections, kept them separate, but never made it a negotiation. I believed shared success would make space for everyone, that they'd remember. They didn't. So now, I responded with terms, not threats. A licensing agreement limited in scope and time, a requirement for attribution in certain key documents, quarterly licensing fees indexed to usage scale, audit provisions, clear breach clauses, a 36-month ceiling, no extensions unless renegotiated. It wasn't revenge, it was structure. Dan helped me refine the language, but most of it I wrote myself, word by word, line by line, just like I'd written the system. Because if they wanted to continue using the technology they had quietly taken for years, it wouldn't be under the table anymore. It wouldn't be hidden behind Craig's casual confidence or a new name slapped on old bones. It would be on record, tracked, timed, tied to my terms. They had treated my silence as absence. Now they had to treat my presence as non-negotiable. And the same board that once approved my departure without a question now needed my signature just to keep their platform alive. It took less than a week for the tone to shift again. This time, it wasn't just legal. It was a partner from their board, someone I'd met once at a holiday function years ago, back when Helix still fit in one floor of a building and people made eye contact in the elevator. He opened the call with my name like it was something fragile. Madeline, I want to personally apologize for how things were handled. Handled. A word people use when they do not want to say broken. I let him speak. I let him repeat all the phrases polished by crisis. Valuable contribution, unfortunate timing, lapse in judgment, hope for reconciliation. I waited until he ran out of air. Then I asked one question. Who built the thing you're trying to salvage? He was quiet for a beat too long. And that silence, that pause, was the first honest thing anyone from Helix had given me since I left. They had known it was built on my work. They just thought I'd never make them reckon with that. For years, they used the structure as if it were a utility. Plugged in, turned on, scaled up. They thought the absence of a signature meant freedom. But I had signed, just not with them. My filings had been archived, time-stamped, notarized. Not by accident, but because I understood early on that trust in business isn't a handshake. It's a record they never asked for, because they didn't think they'd need it. They had investors to charm, clients to impress, legal teams to defer blame to. And for a while it worked, until the system failed. Not publicly, but quietly, in ways they couldn't explain, in calls they couldn't control. One client, an old contact from the early days, reached out to me directly. Their data hadn't synced properly for 10 days. Their regional compliance board had flagged them for inconsistencies. They had filed a formal concern, not with Helix, with me, because my name was still on the backup documentation, still on the reference white papers, still on the early architecture draft that had been circulated before Helix ever had a PR team. The truth hadn't disappeared. It had just been ignored. And now, it was surfacing in the exact places they least expected it. Emma called me later that night, voice lower than usual. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, not since I walked away. But something in her tone made me sit up straighter. They're trying to fix things from the outside in, she said, but nothing's syncing. They patched the interface again. It made things worse. She hesitated, then added, Craig doesn't understand why. I didn't laugh, I didn't gloat. I just let the silence hang for a moment before answering, because he never learned how it actually worked. And that was the truth. You cannot rewrite something you never read. You cannot stabilize a system built on choices you never understood. And now they were finding out, too late, that foundations aren't made of code or branding or press releases. They're made of people. And the person who built theirs no longer worked there, but she still owned the ground under it. The news didn't break in the media. It never needed to. What happened to Helix spread the same way trust collapses. Through questions asked in quiet meetings, through partners who suddenly stopped replying, through clients who didn't say, we're leaving, but simply stopped logging in. Their platform had been my structure. Every time they modified it without understanding the spine underneath, it responded like a body rejecting the wrong blood type. Transactions stalled, reports returned blank. Compliance reviews flagged gaps no one could trace, and still they delayed admitting what was wrong. Until one morning I woke to a message from Dan. They want a meeting, not to negotiate, to ask for help. I stared at the words, not because they surprised me, but because they confirmed something I had known from the beginning. Eventually, they'd have to come back to the foundation, and I was still standing on it. We didn't meet at Helix. I refused to step back into that building, not because of pride, but because I had already left it once with everything I needed. Instead, we met at a neutral office downtown, one of those glass-walled places used for arbitrations and off-site board retreats. It smelled like coffee and recent panic. Craig didn't come. He had, as Dan later told me, stepped aside temporarily. I didn't ask whether that meant resigned, suspended, or simply hiding. Instead, I met with two of their new interim leads and a lawyer who barely spoke. They laid out the situation: system-wide sync failures, legal inquiries about licensing compliance, loss of 5 major clients in 8 weeks, and a merger partner reconsidering strategic alignment. Then came the request. We're prepared to move forward with the licensing terms you proposed, but we were hoping there might be room for more than just a transaction. The man who spoke looked like he hadn't slept. I remembered seeing his name once on a hiring memo. He wasn't the problem. He had inherited the smoke. I said nothing, just opened the folder in front of me and slid the printed agreement across the table. You'll have exclusive rights to use the technology for 18 months. After that, it either renews under new terms or ends. He scanned the page, then paused. There's a clause here about co-marketing restrictions. Yes, I replied. You may not suggest I'm affiliated with the current team. You may not use my name in promotional material, and you may not imply that what broke was ever mine. There was a long pause, and then he nodded. It was done. They had the technology, but only on lease. The system still bore my signature, buried in every line of its foundation, protected in ways they hadn't seen coming. They could run it, but they could no longer claim it. As I stood to leave, the lawyer finally spoke. You could have taken them to court. Why didn't you? I paused at the door and answered without looking back. Because I didn't need revenge. I just needed the truth to have a cost. And now it did. It's strange watching the company you built from scratch pay to use something they once treated like office air. They didn't send a thank you. No formal acknowledgement. Just quiet payments, quarterly and precise, wired into the account I had set up under the name of my new company. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same system they once believed was just a part of operations now had its own billing cycle, with my name on the invoice. The final licensing agreement ran 27 pages. It allowed Helix to use the core technology, but only under restricted conditions. No sublicensing, no modifications, no public attribution. Most importantly, it had an end date, 18 months. After that, they would either have to rebuild the system from scratch or come back to me again. I didn't create this limitation to punish. I created it to protect what mattered. Not the code, not the architecture, but the principle. If you want to use what someone else built, you acknowledge the hands that built it. Meanwhile, something new was growing. In less than a year, the company I started quietly, deliberately, was already listed as one of the fastest-growing data platforms in the sector. We didn't run ads. We didn't need noise. Clients came to us with questions Helix could no longer answer. They didn't just want software, they wanted clarity, continuity, trust. And this time, I built it right. I didn't rush to scale. I didn't bring in people who needed convincing. I chose partners who had nothing to prove but everything to build. Emma joined after 3 months. Dan followed soon after. Even Leah, who had left quietly after the audit, reached out one day with a single line: "If you're building something that matters, I'm in." And I was. We started small, but the difference was immediate. No hierarchy for the sake of appearances. No CEO hiding behind someone else's work. Everyone in the room knew what we were doing and why. We didn't just rebuild a platform. We rebuilt a philosophy, and the clients felt it. We passed Helix in active user growth in Q2, then in renewals, then in total revenue. They kept trying to catch up, but every time they stumbled, they looked for fixes inside the code. Never realizing the real loss wasn't in the system. It was in the people they pushed out to make room for noise. I still walk by their building sometimes. It looks smaller now, not physically, but in presence. A place that once demanded everything I had now sits quiet behind a glass door I no longer need to open. They're still running the platform. But now, they pay for it. And in just under a year, they went from pretending I never existed to needing my signature to keep the lights on. Because this was never about titles. It was never about revenge. It was about remembering where things begin and who still holds the keys when the system forgets.